Good morning from London. I'm Anna Edwards alongside Guy Johnson and Kriti Gupta. We're an hour away from the opening trade. Here's what you need to know. Donald Trump outlines his America First policy as he accepts the Republican nomination, giving details of the assassination attempt. This as pressure mounts on Joe Biden to bow out. In Europe, Ursula von der Leyen wins a second term as European Commission chief. Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer pledges to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Plus, hopes for easing as more signs point to the Fed and possibly the ECB cutting rates in September. We'll bring you details of the ECB.
In the meantime, a quick check on these markets. You are seeing futures probably possibly higher by 0.2% when we look at Eurostoxx 50 futures, but underperformance right here in the UK, down to the tune of 0.4%. The bond market gets interesting, though. 4.48 on that two-year yield, only higher by 1 basis point. But the fact that we are sustainably below 4.50 over in the States is crucial. Plus, of course, 108.89 on euro-dollar as we await all those geopolitical headlines Anna was just talking about. The countdown to the opening trade starts right now.
There is no victory in winning for half of America. So tonight, with faith and devotion, I proudly accept your nomination for President of the United States.
Friday the 19th, good morning. Donald Trump accepting the nomination to be President of the United States for the Republican Party yesterday, officially accepting the GOP nomination with what I thought was a pretty interesting speech. So it's Trump versus Vance, Trump and Vance versus who, Kriti?
Versus TBD, and it could really come to it. We get some clarity on that in just a couple of days. It has been crucial. The last 24 hours, the Washington Post reporting that President Obama himself, the former, of course, Democratic president, that was the president with Joe Biden as VP, privately suggesting that Joe Biden should step down. This is the first time President Obama himself has come out. Yes. He usually stays far away from the politics, and specifically has not in the past endorsed his VP pick for even the presidential nomination.
Yes, and linking the two stories, it's interesting to think whether any Democrats, and I know we talk Kamala Harris as soon as we talk about where Biden goes, but whether any Democrats want to stand against a showman who puts on something that looks more like it's out of WrestleMania than you know, traditional Republican politics, whether ever any Democrats really want to step into that.
It is a tough one, isn't it? Do you let Biden run and then lose and then move on to 2028? I think that's a legitimate question that I think needs to be asked. But it does feel as if the tide has turned for Joe Biden. The pressure is now insurmountable, it feels. The fact that we do see Obama stepping into the fray, I think, is hugely significant at this point.
And the fact that you are starting to see more and more senators come out from the woodwork. Now Pelosi, Schumer, and Hakeem Jeffries have all been speaking privately, according to reports, to President Biden to step down. On the Trump side, though, as we talk about where the hints are for the economic agenda, remember, he still has a burden to bear here, that he is not the chaotic president of his first term, that he does indeed actually have a plan, and stability is something he is trying to project, which there is some speculation out there of whether or not that speech was, by design, meant to be a little vague.
Right, yeah. I don't think he would say it as chaotic either the first time around, would he? But we'll leave people to make their own conclusions. Let's talk about where we are on European politics, obviously watching what's going on in the United States very closely. And we saw that hanging over the events at Blenheim Palace yesterday. But over to France, the spread, French bonds over German, pretty stuck at 65 as we wait for more progress on who's going to be Prime Minister. We don't know that yet, but we do know who's going to continue to lead the National Assembly. And they are not linked in the sense that this is not as important as the Prime Ministerial job, but they may be slightly linked because if you're talking about how we're going to form the next coalition, it tells you something a bit interesting, that Emmanuel Macron was able to hang on to his person, to his representative as leader of the National Assembly.
Yeah, I think I think the National Assembly feels like is an easier challenge to surmount.
Yeah, it is.
The Prime Minister feels like a much more difficult one. The question I think a lot of people are now beginning to talk about with regards to France is how long can a caretaker Prime Minister operate for?
Yeah.
Is it weeks? Is it
in it for the
months?
long haul, it seems. According to our
Precisely.
reporting yesterday, Gabriel Attal, of course, the caretaker with limited powers as we head towards an Olympics and the world's attention.
Well, the
on Paris.
Olympics and then the kind of budget talks with the European Commission, I believe, in September. So they still have a little bit of time to figure this out, but not that much time to really get it together. And this is, of course, in the context that the left had to kind of gather and make sure that they have and campaign very quickly in response to Le Pen in a way that they may not have been prepared for to begin with.
Interesting that Lagarde was asked yesterday, of course, about budget restraints, and she didn't name any countries, but she did call for countries to stick to fiscal discipline and the EU rules.
In English, not in French. Maybe it should have been in French or Italian or
many of the other languages
or many of the other languages she speaks, precisely. The markets have got to digest all of this, of course, and the markets are dealing with so much right now. Politics clearly is a factor. We're seeing that in the United States being represented with the Trump trade. It's a factor over here in Europe. I think the politics and the uncertainty being folded in to the European story. We asked the question yesterday morning, are you going to buy the dip? And in some ways, the answer was yes, and in some ways, the answer was no. It was interesting. NVIDIA bounced pretty strongly yesterday. Broadcom was up really quite nicely. Some of the tech stocks did well yesterday. Remember, we've got Alphabet and Tesla reporting numbers next week. Others didn't. Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, all down pretty hard yesterday. And the rally that we were kind of hanging our hats on in small caps came to a sort of conclusion yesterday as well. The Russell underperforming. We saw actually a lot of the broadening trade that has worked over the last few weeks starting to come unstuck.
Yeah, it feels like the small cap trade was really a feature at the start of the week, wasn't it? Even by the middle of the week, it was starting to fade. So it does raise questions about whether this was all one big rotation. We're back to asking about the Magnificent Seven. You know, they're not all as magnificent as each other, and there are cracks within that, which has been a theme, actually, for a lot of the year.
There's also speculation, to your point about the Trump trade, about whether this kind of unwinding that you're seeing, and we talked about the chips trade, but in some of the defense stocks as well, is really a reflection of President Trump and whether or not what his policies may actually look like if it's coming to more additional aid for Ukraine and other European countries as well, or even chips.
There is commodities. Meant to mention commodities.
This is the China trade, isn't it, as well? Which
absolutely. So disappointment around the plenum, and we talked about that a little bit yesterday, but maybe you should reference it a bit more because this is definitely weighing on Asia. And copper down 2%, iron ore down nearly 2.5% through the Asia session. So obviously that can have a read across into the London markets.
It's been a tough week for risk assets.
Yeah.
And you can't, like Vance talking about the idea that he's not on board with Wall Street, and you just wonder whether the mood has changed. I appreciate that he's the presidential candidate, but nevertheless, the Republican Party is meant to be the party that supports these guys.
The market friendly,
Doesn't feel like it coming to the end of the RNC.
But is this in what we're seeing in the stock markets on both sides of the Atlantic, by the way, is this just a breather? There's been a rally in the works for a while. Is this simply people ahead of a light liquidity next month that we're expecting to just take some cash off the table?
Could be. Might not be.
Maybe.
We're going to wait and see. It's going to be, I think next week's going to be fascinating as we start to get deeper into the earnings season. You are being punished for not delivering this earnings season. Let's tell you what we've got coming up on the show today. For markets, we've got you covered. We've got the head of fixed income strategy from Saxo Bank and the head of BlackRock's EMEA investment strategy coming up a little bit later on the show. We've also got a pretty good idea of what people are going to be doing this weekend, and I do wonder whether or not it's going to be maybe not thinking about the politics and maybe not thinking about the markets. The Open is on. Roil Troon is playing. It's playing hard. Let's put it that way. And we've got golf in not a particularly happy place. You've got the PGA versus LIV as well. We're going to be talking to one of the big pros on one side of that battle. Ian Poulter is going to be joining us. His team principal, James Dunkley, is going to be joining us as well alongside him. If you want to talk about the golf, I'm all ears. It's not. The 8th is not playing well at Roil Troon. Kriti's just looking at me.
Yeah, you're looking at me as if you're expecting me to say something.
I'm just Googling the Olympics timetable. Well, you carry on.
Is the opening ceremony next weekend?
No, today. Isn't it? I think so.
OK. I may be wrong about
We're clearly on the pulse of the Olympics.
Yeah, we'll move on from sport.
But from golf to President Trump, I think feels like a natural transition as well. We want to come back to our top story, or one of our top stories this morning, which, of course, is what's going to happen, what is happening out of the RNC, and where President Biden may go next in terms of whether or not he is actually the Democratic nominee. Let's get more on this with Bloomberg's European Executive Editor of Government, Chad Thomas, joins us this morning. Chad, before we get to the developments over in the Democratic camp, let's start with what President Trump said at his speech in the RNC convention yesterday. His very first speech, by the way, since his assassination attempt. What were your takeaways here? Did you feel like you got some direction on terms of the policy agenda?
Hi, Kriti. Good morning. Well, as Anna was saying at the top of the show, President Trump puts on a good show, and that is what we saw in the last night of the convention. This was a convention about unity. All of his political opponents were there this week blessing him becoming the nominee, and it all wrapped up last night with him taking the stage. He had said that after that attempted assassination, he would be rewriting his speech, and we did hear a bit of a different speech from him last night. He opened talking about that attempted assassination on him and how that transpired. That was the first time we had heard him talking about that. He said it was so traumatic, he wasn't going to talk about it more. We'll see what happens as he goes out on the campaign trail. He also, they also had something up there on the stage, a uniform for the firefighter who had died in that assassination attempt with Trump kissing it. It really was a show that he put on. When we talk about the policy side of things, it was his America First policy where he talked again about tariffs, about bringing down inflation. He said he would take money that is being spent in the Biden administration on clean energy, and he would redirect that into things like transportation. So this was really an opportunity for him to show that he was in control of the party, and that is what we got from him last night.
And Chad, talk of Biden's departure continues to dominate the other side of the race. What do we make of the latest speculation there?
Well, as you were saying at the beginning, President Obama privately telling people that President Biden has to reconsider his position in the race, I think is a very significant development. Of course, the two of them are very close. And it's not a coincidence or accidental that we're getting every day a drip, drip, drip in the media of top Democrats saying that it's potentially time for President Biden to step aside. We've also had a number of senators and congressmen in tight districts publicly saying that he should step aside. It'll be interesting to see, though, how this plays out in the next couple of days. There was some new polling out yesterday that showed President Biden slipping further and further behind in some of the key swing states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. That's the kind of ammo that we're hearing Nancy Pelosi is using to try and convince President Biden to step out of the race. Nancy Pelosi, of course, the former House Speaker, she has been telling Democrats that she believes that President Biden can be convinced to step aside.
Yep. We'll find out this weekend. It's going to be an interesting weekend, I suspect, for US politics. That story now takes over front and centre after the conclusion of the RNC. Chad, thank you very much indeed, our executive editor, Chad Thomas. What are we watching for the rest of the day? We've just had UK retail sales, by the way. They were weak. We get Canadian retail sales out a little bit later on. Bostic and Williams are speaking. We get a Turkey sovereign rating after update, not upgrade, update after the conclusion of play today. So plenty of things to keep an eye on today, but in some ways, normally that board has kind of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 items on it. Today feels a little quieter.
Yes, and I correct myself. You are entirely correct, Guy. It's a week until the opening ceremony in Paris.
Anna's clearly so excited about it.
Very excited.
I think there's a press conference today.
Got ahead of myself. There we are. There's some Olympic thoughts happening today. So we'll have to stick with the golf over the weekend. Here's what else we need to know, though. Let's tell you some of the other stories we're following here at Bloomberg. Shares of Broadcom gained after a report that it's discussing making an AI chip for OpenAI. Tech news site The Information says the ChatGPT maker has approached Broadcom as part of the startup's discussions with chip designers. Though NVIDIA has been the biggest beneficiary of AI spending, Broadcom is making gains in the market. Meta is said to be in talks to take a minority stake in the maker of Ray-Ban sunglasses. Sources have told Bloomberg that the firm is considering a stake of as much as 5% in EssilorLuxottica. Both companies had earlier collaborated on Ray-Ban Meta smart eyewear. The social media giant is looking to expand its virtual and augmented reality efforts and to strengthen its position against rivals. We saw shares of EssilorLuxottica respond to this yesterday. Now, Netflix shares, however, are a touch lower in late trade, even after the streaming giant posted blowout subscription numbers for the second quarter. The streaming giant's customer numbers topped expectations in every region and included 2.8 million new customers in Asia Pacific. The company also raised estimates for annual sales and profit margins, but said new users this quarter will trail the gains this time last year. And to your point, Guy, about there being a tough hurdle to get over for earnings stories, because yes, there were some disappointing elements, but there were also some impressive subscriber numbers. Price targets had been increasing in the run-up to these numbers, and it seemed like the market was looking for more and more. The market's always looking for more and more, and this is the shining star in some ways of the streaming sector as well. You look at what is happening with Warner Brothers. Look at what is happening with the rest of the sector. Disney's struggling. Netflix is making money in this space, and it's one of the few that is able to do so. But it doesn't. The market is still looking for more here, and the comps are getting tougher and tougher, you could argue. It's going to be really interesting to see how much money they're going to have to spend and whether or not it is going to be enough to keep this train on the track. Bridgerton was good. I think a lot of people watched it.
Did you watch it?
Yeah.
I watched bits of it. It was on in the background.
OK, I'm intrigued. What's the Venn diagram? What's the level of overlap between our audience and the Bridgerton audience? I'm wondering.
I would say fairly high.
One third of this table, for sure.
1/3. There we go.
The pie charts.
Really endorsement.
It's significant, I think. But I think also outside of the content building, outside the media space as well, Netflix's kind of growth numbers, so much of it is coming from outside the U.S., which makes Netflix as a stock so much more volatile and vulnerable to currency swings in a way that we see in Microsoft, for example, Starbucks, Nike, McDonald's, the ones that have more exposure internationally than they do at home. So when you see a dollar trade, for example, it tends to show up in those stocks. I'm wondering how far we are for that to show up in Netflix.
Yeah, at some point that might turn into from being a headwind to being a tailwind, though.
Yeah.
If the dollar goes down quite significantly.
It's an EM thing as well, yeah.
Yeah, that might work as well. What have we got coming up for you? We're going to check on defence stocks. Post-Trump, post the story we saw yesterday at the RNC. We're seeing certainly a ramp-up in rhetoric around Ukraine. Plus, we're going to bring you an exclusive conversation with the new UK Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. UK retail sales this morning, fairly soft. How do we turn around the story here in the UK? Rachel Reeves may have some answers. Cristine Lagarde leaving the door open, wide open to a September meeting. Cuts potentially. We're going to discuss the probabilities around that. You want to join the debate? What did you think of Bridgerton? Are you watching the golf this weekend? IB Plus, BBTV Go. That's the function. This is Bloomberg.
The question of September and what we do in September is wide open and will be determined on the basis of all the data that we will be receiving. There is no predetermined path, and that was very strongly endorsed by the Governing Council.
That was, of course, ECB President Christine Lagarde speaking yesterday at the press conference, talking about the possibility of a cut from the ECB in September. That will be the second cut. Does that make it a cycle? I think we probably need to see a third cut, maybe, for it to be a cycle. Althea Spinozzi, head of fixed income strategy at Saxo Bank, joins us now to discuss. What do you think about the possibility of a September cut?
I think that there is a very low probability for a September cut. And the reason being is that it was very clear yesterday from the ECB meeting that the ECB remains data dependent and doesn't want to give a forward guidance. It's worried about inflation remaining sticky and is well above the ECB economic projections in June. So moving forward and going at the September meeting, it's very likely that the ECB will need to revise its inflation forecasts for 2024 upwards. And that means that if they deliver an interest rate cut, well, that contradicts their mandate. I think at this point, an October cut is more likely than a September cut.
OK, how likely is an October cut? Are we going to get one more cut this year, do you think?
I think that two more cuts are possible, an October cut and a December cut. The problem is obviously how the macroeconomic situation is evolving. There has been a recovery in the European area, and it seems that inflation remains sticky. but interest rates are very high, so the ECB can definitely cut rates at this point in time. But Guy, I think also that when we look at the story in Europe, we have also to look at what's happening in the United States, because the two go hand in hand. So if the Federal Reserve doesn't deliver on interest rate cuts expectations that are priced in markets, well, it's likely that the ECB is going to move slower as well.
Yes, on that point, Althea, we heard from Lagarde yesterday. She said the ECB must take into account policies set elsewhere, and of course she was bound to be asked about this. What is the thinking about how the timing of Fed cuts affects the ECB?
Well, definitely is going to affect timing on the ECB side as well, because if the ECB is too aggressive in cutting rates, the euro currency might weaken. And obviously, while on one side is good to have a weaker euro currency because it's good for economic activity, on the other side, it can bring back inflation by overheating the economy or even importing inflation from energy at this point in time. And when we look at the Federal Reserve, well, anything can happen on that perspective for the simple reason that there is two narratives pushing bond markets on different directions. On one, we have the U.S. elections, and on the other, we have a slowdown of the economic activity that might induce the Federal Reserve to cut the rates, but we don't know yet.
OK, and you think both of those conflict with each other and produce different outcomes for bond markets and for yields accordingly. What about the French story? Can I ask how that weighs into the ECB's thinking at this point? I mean, we've seen the spread settle around the 65 mark, Althea. You know, that's much higher than it was, but much lower than it was as well at the height of the concerns around French policymaking. How long do we need to wait? What are you assuming is the length of time we need to wait for some clarity in France?
Well, politics take their own time, but at this point in time, when I look at the bond market and at the French Bund spread, it's very clear that it's going to remain elevated for some times. But it's not bad news in the meaning that when we look at the European sovereign spreads, outside of France, for example, the BTP and Bund spreads, that's very tight. So there is no sense of urgency from the side of the ECB to intervene with an instrument such as the transmission protection instruments. At this point in time, I really believe that we are not going to see another spike in French Bund spreads. And it's very likely that we see tightening towards the end of the year, towards the 50-60 mark.
All right, Althea, very, very quickly. I'm curious if the ECB isn't tapping into those concerns, are investors, as we go closer to those budget conversations in September, is that when we perhaps see a little bit more volatility, if perhaps not to the level we saw last month? 30 seconds.
Definitely, it can rise volatility. But I think that at this point, more markets have more in their mind. And that important piece of the puzzle is who's going to be the next president of the United States. And volatility is going to surround that topic more than the budget deficit in Europe.
Certainly seems to be the consensus view. Althea Spinozzi, we have to leave it there. Head of Fixed Income Strategy over at Saxo Bank. We thank you so much for joining the program this morning. Coming up, we're going to bring you our exclusive conversation with the new UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves, talking about really what the economics of right here in the UK look as we kind of digest the conversation over in France and, of course, all eyes in the States as well. Plus, kind of the fallout, if we will, of the conversations happening in Blenheim Palace with Keir Starmer's very first European political summit. That and more next. This is Bloomberg.
At the meetings where we have topics, I have not heard them come up. But of course, when we have coffee in between, people discuss what happens in the world, and of course, all European politicians follow the American campaign. I have taken the decision that I'm not going to be a commentator on the week-to-week development of it. But of course, you know, American presidential elections are very important to most European countries because it affects alliances and what we do together and security.
The Norwegian Prime Minister there speaking to our very own Oliver Crook at the European Political Community Summit at Blenheim Palace in the UK. And of course, hosting his first major international gathering since becoming Prime Minister. Keir Starmer used the event to reiterate the West's continuing support for Ukraine.
We pledge to President Zelensky once again that we will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. We also had a productive discussion on wider European security, defending our democracies against Russian interference.
All right, Keir Starmer there speaking at one of his very first defense summits here in the UK. Yes. Of course, this comes right off the heels of the NATO summit as well. It felt like the purpose of this summit was to, on the one hand, create kind of friendlier relations with Europe, but also reinforce the fact that the UK is very much willing to help Ukraine and contribute more to that defense story.
Yes, and of course, the possibility of Trump 2.0 hangs over this in terms of support for Ukraine, support for NATO. And with that in mind, it is interesting to think about, you know, what do we really know about Trump's policies? We've had plenty of suggestions as to what he might do, but we also know from Trump 1.0, some of these are convictions he will stick to, and others are starters for 10 and transactional and, you know, put some more money on the table, Europe, and who knows what kind of point of view you might then get from a White House.
So put some more money on the table. But that's a big ask for Europe.
Yeah.
And Europe doesn't feel like it's ready necessarily to do that. Germany certainly is increasing its budget, but it feels like it's miles behind in terms of the efforts that must be made.
And there are already reports that they're actually considering cutting back on their defense to Ukraine by as much as half. Yeah. Reports around that, at least. And that's just the German story. But I'm curious, where do you see the step up when you still have some countries like Poland, for example, saying, well, that 2% number that we talk about for NATO, even 3% should go up to as high as 5%, for example.
Yeah, and it's 2% the minimum.
Yeah. Depends what you're preparing for, doesn't it, really?
Well, precisely. But it does feel as if Europe now needs to take seriously the possibility that it must take greater responsibility for its defence. Because if you listen to what came out of the RNC, the focus is on Asia, the focus is on China, the focus is not necessarily on what is happening in Europe. The priority is not here.
It's not here, and yet when you look at some of the folks that have turned into the top jobs at the EU itself, it's the likes of the former Prime Minister of Estonia, for example, who's been very vocal about the defense story. And for someone like her to be in now one of the top jobs within the EU, I think is a pretty telling moment.
OK, we'll see where this moves next. Let's focus in on European politics and what it makes of this story. Ursula von der Leyen has won a second 5-year term as President of the European Union's executive arm. The European Parliament voted 401 in favour, clearing the 360 that she needed. Von der Leyen's victory comes at a time when several key European leaders are facing significant political challenges at home, as we've documented many times on this programme. Let's get more on this story with Bloomberg's Lyubov Pronina. Lyubov, what kind of support did von der Leyen get? I mean, from the numbers, it sounds like in the end she cleared it comfortably enough.
Indeed, as you rightly mentioned, she got 401 votes from the European Parliament members, and it gave her a comfortable margin. It was much more than in her first term in 2019, when she just got a small margin of 9 votes. And the support came from the 3 biggest political groups in the European Parliament: her own political group, European People's Party, also Socialists and Liberals. A good addition that provided that extra margin came from the Greens that she was courting for a while before this very important vote. Those who voted against were Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's political group. She was also courting them, and the left and the far right, because they said, we don't want 5 years of the same, we don't want the status quo, we want a change.
Well, speaking of that change, and please elaborate on the policies you were talking around Meloni in particular. We, of course, know that this wasn't exactly the outcome that she wanted, to your point. But in terms of those policies, a new 5-year mandate, there's plenty of time for those policies to change. What might potentially be on the table?
So basically, she said, she indicated in her political guidelines that the main challenges of this era are competitiveness, climate and security. She said that the goals that were set forth in the first mandate, such as the Green Deal, which is their policy to green the economy and make it climate neutral by 2050, that stays the course. What is changing is the efforts to match these ambitions to reality and to industry that Europe has to let it stay competitive. So she announced that in the first 100 days, she will come up with a clean industrial deal that will address these issues and will help the industry along with investments and with the development. Another focus of her next 5-year mandate will be defense and security. And she actually said that there's a need for a European defense union that will invest in high-end technologies. There's need to create the so-called air defense shield. She will appoint a special defense commissioner, so that's new, who will overlook those strategies. She also addressed the social issues at the time when Europeans are experiencing the crisis, the cost of living crisis. And within those first 100 days, she will provide the affordable housing plan, something that people were talking about for quite a while. She also addressed international relations. She said that Europe will continue to support Ukraine in financial, political, and military way for as long as it's needed. She touched on the relationship with China and the level playing field. She also mentioned development and improving relationship with the United Kingdom. Not so much in terms of details how relations will develop with the United States, though.
Libor, we're going to leave you there. Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed for the updates. Libor Pronina talking about the second VDL term. Maybe a little bit different to the first one. Let's talk about also what is happening here in the UK and the change that is taking place. The UK Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is warning of difficult decisions ahead as she tries to fix Britain's public finances. The UK's first female Chancellor joins Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua for an exclusive interview after the Labour Party's landslide election win earlier this month.
That is absolutely crucial because there's no plans that I can draw up in my new office in the Treasury that are going to work unless we have business buy-in. And I hope that businesses saw in Labour's manifesto and also in the plans that we've announced in government have the fingerprints of business all over them, because these plans have been co-written with business because they're all about unlocking private sector investment into our economy.
Chancellor, are you considering tax breaks to either boost pension savings or make UK investments more attractive?
I'm not going to announce any tax breaks or tax changes without saying where the money is going to come from. And we will have a budget later this year. But I also just need to be really clear and honest about the scale of the challenge that we've inherited with the public finances. We're going to have to make difficult decisions. We need to fix the foundations before we can start rebuilding things in Britain. But unlike the previous government, I am going to be honest about the scale of the challenge. I'm going to level with people, and together we're going to rebuild our country based on that private sector business investment to get our economy growing. Because I asked the Treasury officials to give me an assessment of how much stronger the UK economy would be today if we'd have grown at just the average rate of OECD economies these last 14 years. And the answer is we'd be £140 billion bigger today. Well, I welcome the FCA changes just last week to really turbocharge listings in the UK. And I want businesses to choose Britain as a place to list. For the last few years, we've seen story after story about companies delisting from the London Stock Exchange, listing in New York, listing in Europe. I want to turn that around. I want Britain to be the place of choice to make an IPO, to grow your business. That's why I welcome the reforms that the FCA put in place last week. It's also why I'm determined to change our pension system so we can unlock some of those assets under management to help start up and scale up businesses access the capital they need so we can keep more businesses here in Britain.
Chancellor, the US is also really going quite hard on tariffs with China. We're going up to an election. The UK has not really squared with the EU on EV tariffs, for example, or the US. How would you deal, as a small open economy, with China and Chinese tariffs?
Well, we are a small, open trading economy and we benefit from those trade links with countries around the world, both for exports and imports, but also for foreign direct investment. And our view is that where possible, we trade, we cooperate and we challenge in areas where it's important to challenge. But we don't want to close the UK economy down to imports and exports. We benefit from those trade links around the world, including with China.
UK's new Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, speaking exclusively to Francine Lacroix. We didn't get a big consumer bounce this morning on the back of that Labour victory. You would have assumed maybe if everybody was happy with it, people would be feeling a little bit more joyful. Yeah, you might have thought so. It edged up, didn't it, to a near a three-year high, but that was really a continuation of the trend of the last 4 months. And it's sort of lots of dynamics that feel like they're just a continuation of what we've seen over the last few months. People were making that point politically about the good hand that Starmer has been dealt with NATO and the European conference taking place on his doorstep right at the beginning of his term, giving a look to it that perhaps is actually, credit to the last government. Yeah, I thought what was interesting on that interview, especially when she said the public finances are a challenge that have to be tackled. It's pretty ominous speaking from someone who's just inherited the balance book of the country. And yet, we're talking about deficit issues in France, in the United States, et cetera. And yet, no one is seeing the strength that you're seeing in cable that just continues to sustain despite the same issues globally. Yeah, she made the point yesterday about the UK being an area of stability and safety in an uncertain world. And we'll see where that plays, where that goes. But certainly that is the feeling that they're trying to create at this point. Talking of stability or instability, we should probably talk about what's happening with Microsoft this morning. It seems that we've got a series of technical issues. We're trying to kind of figure out exactly what's been resolved, what hasn't been resolved. Cathay Pacific was talking about login issues, check-in issues earlier this morning out in Asia. I'm not sure it's connected. The LSE group is investigating technical issues with RNS announcements this morning. We'll try and get to the bottom of what is happening here and the impact that it's having on global business this morning. We'll do that as we work our way towards the European Open. We'll check in on a few stocks that are moving on the back of some earnings news as well this morning. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the programme. 7:46 here in London, 8:46 in Paris or Berlin. Negativity across the screen. Futures pointing a little bit lower, not everywhere. And in fact, overall, the futures picture might be fairly flat, but certainly the major markets expected to be lower. We've already flagged that we might have an issue with getting news, RNS statements from the London Stock Exchange this morning. So a sense of uncertainty around this Microsoft story, which we'll get to shortly, and try and get a sense of how widespread the issues are there. For the moment, let's nip back to the markets proper and get 3 minutes on these markets. Mark Cudmore joins us, executive editor for Markets Live. And Mark, the focus on a lot of selling in the States recently, rotation or not rotation, we've had this conversation a few times, but now we've seen an uptick in volatility. What does that suggest lies ahead?
Yeah, we saw a real jump in the VIX yesterday, the highest level since April, and I think it has a little bit more to play out. This kind of rotation's been a theme for the last week. It's been quite painful. We've talked about for the last year or more about the concentration risk in the US stock market, about how it's getting more and more intense. And obviously, there's been some pain there. I think how yesterday suddenly seemed to get people so upset took me a little bit by surprise. I probably should have anticipated that, but it turned into a real risk aversion event. Even though the selling of the overall stock market wasn't too drastic, we saw stock markets around the world weaken. We saw that haven trade for the dollar. So I think people are a little bit in the back foot. I don't see that suddenly to get aggressive buy the dip attitude to go too enthusiastic just yet. But perhaps by middle of next week, earnings can get us more positive again because the overall backdrop's not too bad.
Mark, does this not just feel like a little bit of a mini correction, if you will, in the face of this rally that we've seen ahead of a light liquidity environment in August? People just taking cash off the table?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Kriti. That's the way I'm seeing it. This is not some big turning point in the overall market. This is not the start of some bear market. Obviously, you've got to be flexible in these things, but to me, this is just a mini correction, and it probably has a little bit more to play out, but I don't see it being drastic. I think the bigger story, the one that's maybe the chance to be sustainable, is the bigger kind of change of leadership that might be taking place. That is also under debate. But there's a chance here that we could see the stock market have increased volatility, come off a little bit further, but overall we could see the big cap tech names suffer a lot more. And that would be quite dramatic for a lot of portfolios, but it wouldn't impact a lot of the index levels so much.
Mark, talk to me about what role politics is playing in all of this.
It's weird. It's really, really increasing the risk aversion, the jitteriness out there. It has played into that VIX trade. It's playing into the nervousness. It's playing into kind of the knee-jerk reactions. And it's being blamed for everything. But I say all that, I'm not sure how much trading this week has really been done on politics. The variety of stories, the surge of Trump's in the polls and likely to win, and of the whole stories about Biden. I don't think, people get very excited about the Trump trade, but what we thought of as the Trump trade has evolved so much over the past week, and it keeps on shifting. And I really think that people just keep on backfitting the narrative to whatever kind of matters at whatever point in time. So, look, politics, it would be wrong to say politics is having no impact. But the impact of politics is more just to increase the volatility, increase the nervousness, and increase the murkiness and the lack of clarity in trends. But it's not the main driver of markets at the moment.
Bloomberg Markets Live executive editor Mark Cudmore joining us. It's a weird market. There's a lot of factors to fold in that we're really struggling, I think, to kind of understand and price properly. The debate will continue. You want to follow the debate? There's an easy way of doing it. 6 letters, MLIV GO, on your Bloomberg terminal. You get access to the Markets Live team and all their fantastic thoughts and ruminations. Let's talk a little bit, talking of wild events. This Microsoft thing feels like it's hard to quantify at this point. There has been an outage. They're talking about it being in a degraded, some of the 365 suite being in a degraded state. There are technical issues popping up in strange places this morning that I don't know whether we can join the dots yet or not on, but it feels like there's something bigger afoot.
Gotta love the cloud, haven't you?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're one business and your IT goes down, that's just you. But if lots of businesses are attached to the same IT infrastructure and that goes down, then there's a bigger problem. And so that's what we seem to be seeing today. Microsoft saying that, yes, they remain in a degraded state, to use those words. We're also seeing several airlines and airports globally facing widespread IT issues. Yeah. And there do seem to be links between these stories. The LSE has already told us this morning they're investigating technical issues regarding RNS statements, whether news flow will come quickly from them is not clear.
And we should remember to say that the context is important here. You mentioned some of the airlines as well. Frontier Group was one of the ones that was initially having issues. I think you mentioned Cathay Pacific as well. Remember, this had happened a couple of hours ago, and it was since reported resolved in the meantime. And you're also now seeing a headline come out of ABC, for example, saying American Airlines and Delta asked that the U.S. FAA ground all flights. So this is turning into a more global issue.
That is, if we're seeing...
And we've got United now saying it. United Airlines ground stop all flights. This is according to from the ATC. So from Air Traffic Control, FAA ATC advisory in the United States. That's not even from another
Groundstop
media source.
We've seen ground stops before. This is a huge issue. If we are seeing basically the US domestic fleet, international fleet potentially being grounded as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely enormous. We've seen this in the past. We have seen the technical systems in the US falling over for a relatively minor part of the system.
Yeah.
Being I think it was pilot updates in the past, and that had a huge impact.
Yeah, well, this brings us back a little bit to, and I think I was on location actually in LaGuardia when that happened. Yeah. It brings us back to the whole Southwest story and what kind of issues are unveiled from that kind of grounding.
Yeah, it's interesting as well that some time ago, in fact, about an hour and a half ago, we seem to be getting the message from Microsoft that this had all been resolved. Yeah. And then we get the update that they remain in a degraded state. Yep. So, good to hear that Microsoft is working on these issues. But clearly there was some uncertainty as to whether there was still a problem. And it seems that there still is. Turkish Airlines also giving updates. Sorry if you mentioned that already, Kristine.
No.
but saying that they are taking action to resolve the issues there. So, yeah, the tentacles of this one seem to go far.
Yeah. And I don't think yet we fully understand the implications of all of this. If you start grounding aircraft globally, it's not just today that this will be in effect for. Yeah. This will have a lasting effect throughout the weekend. This will take a long time to resolve. As soon as the schedules start to get messed up, then you have got a lasting problem that lasts hours and days.
OK, so now Delta as well, then. We're getting that update, that official news as well. Delta Airlines ground stop all flights, FAA advisory.
So right off the bat, 2 of the 5 major carriers in the States. And I should mention, of course, it's nighttime in the States, so there isn't that many flights about right now. But the minute they will.
Yeah, people will be starting to get up. It'll be early morning flights that are not going to be happening. So that news will start to have a ripple effect in a big way. You've got inbound flights as well. They're going to be coming in. It's unclear at this point what the technical issue is going to be in terms of where the problem lies. Is it moving aircraft around the terminal? Is it check-in? Is that the problem? Is it something to do with safety? Or is it simply just the inability to check passengers in? We don't know yet.
And we should emphasize we still don't know how much of this is connected to the issues over at the London Stock Exchange or even the Microsoft issues that we saw in 365 as well.
Our colleagues who are looking into this story tentatively linking all of this, so saying there's a series of technical glitches, an unusual cascade of failures that erupted from the US to Asia after Microsoft reported an outage across its online services. So there is a sense that these are connected, but we will wait for, of course, official confirmation. Quick look at where we are on US futures then. Actually,
they've now gone flat,
which sounds like nothing, but they were higher, to your point, Kriti.
Yeah, you can see that drop, and this seems like a little turn in risk sentiment. You're seeing a little bit of a drop in the dollar as well, and now Treasury yields all kind of dropping on the back of it. We, of course, will bring you the European market open in just a few minutes and see what kind of read-through we look to expect. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
Friday the 19th, good morning. 2 minutes to go until the start of equity cash trading here in Europe. I think you can probably toss out what you knew half an hour ago. This Microsoft story, the outages we're seeing with airlines around the world, I think is going to change the tone of the session very, very quickly. Just a little bit of brief history in terms of what we saw yesterday, a sell-off into the close here in Europe, a sell-off into the close over in the United States. I'm not sure how relevant that is going to be now. We did see a mixed performance yesterday from US tech, but the sell-off kind of sold off. The rotation story kind of didn't work yesterday. We saw small caps selling off maybe a little bit more than some of the big caps, which is an interesting reversal from what we saw earlier on in the week. But Kriti, I'm not sure that any of this is a kind of useful guide as to what we're about to see as we start trading here in Europe this morning.
Well, guys, 16 minutes ago, the message was caution. The message was wait and see. The message was not a ton of volatility in futures. Since then, to your point, given us feels like all the technical outages that we are now hearing about around the world, you are seeing risk sentiment worsen. Eurostoxx 50 futures down 0.3%. It gets worse right here in the UK, down 0.7%. And Anna, S&P futures now flat and into negative territory.
Absolutely. And just to update you on the latest lines, Berlin Schönefeld Airport, flight operations suspended. United Air facing issues with some cockpit comms systems. So it seems that there are IT issues that are really widespread. We'll be watching to see what impact this has on stocks in the aviation sector. We put in the LSE as well, though, because we've heard from them this morning that they are facing technical issues as well in terms of getting news to the markets. That might not weigh on their share price particularly, but we'll see how this affects the sector. We put in cars. That was Trump-related, Guy, but we're focused very much on this IT issue now.
Absolutely. How will that affect the opening trade? I think we're about to find out. Keep an eye on the airline sector this morning. We could see a significant impact, but it may be broader than that. We don't know. So here it is, the opening trade here in Europe. Fingers crossed we're actually going to get one, I think is probably the first thing that we should probably be pointing out. It looks like we are seeing DAX trading this morning. I'm not seeing anything else at this point, which starts to maybe ring a few little alarm bells. There we go, the Stock 600. You get a price, maybe those two are connected. We're getting DAX trading feeding into the Stock 600, but I'm not seeing other pricing coming through. There's the IBEX. It's coming through a little bit slower this morning, which is making the hairs on the back of my neck begin to stand up a little bit. The CAC 40 is down by 0.2%. The FTSE 100 and the FTSE MIB are obviously interrelated. I thought this may just be an RNS issue. I'm beginning to wonder about that now. We do not have a price on the FTSE 100 this morning. As you can see, there is a C next to it. We do not have a price on the Italian market either. We have a C next to that. Both of those markets, from a data point of view that we're seeing here at the moment, look like they remain closed. I thought it was just an RNS issue. I thought we would be seeing trading, but it doesn't look like that is the case, guys. It looks like maybe this is going to affect financial markets this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And no surprise that we see the aviation sector being hit hard this morning, under pressure. So travel and leisure as a whole down by 1.3%. And within that, we have TUI down, Ryanair down, EasyJet down. I mean, these are down by 2%. We'll see how long this lasts. We'll see how long it takes for Microsoft to get all these issues solved, if that is what is driving this seemingly widespread technical outage that is affecting various businesses. And it seems that the aviation sector, to Guy's point, the aviation sector is the one we can see right now, because it's pretty obvious when airports don't work and they report things to authorities pretty quickly. We don't know how far this goes. Other businesses could be waking up this morning here in Europe experiencing issues connected to Microsoft.
When we're looking at some of those individual movers, Lufthansa seems to be taking a pretty big hit as well, down anywhere from 1.5%. You're seeing trades come in hot and heavy there. The IAG trades are coming in a little bit slower as well, but still down, to your point, Anna, by about 1%. Those are the two big ones that I was keeping an eye on. Outside of the aviation sector, though, when you do look at kind of the sentiment story, a lot of those miners, a lot of the commodity trade that we were seeing play out on the macro sphere are seemingly down, weighing on the index guy when it comes to the stock 600. But again, a few slow trades still panning out.
And I can see some stocks in London trading. I can see them moving. Yeah. It's just that we're not getting that
index calculation.
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe the issue isn't as great as we first thought, but nevertheless still one to keep an eye on. Let's try and get an understanding of let's segment this and try and get an understanding of kind of what is going on. It clearly looks like it is going to be a transport-related story initially.
At least first off, exactly.
But as you say, the airlines probably are feeling this first because other companies won't be kind of alive to the issue.
Such a time-critical business.
Exactly. Benedict Campbell leads our aviation coverage, our global aerospace coverage. He joins us now out of Berlin. Benedict, give me an idea of what is going on. Just kind of, you guys will be collating and looking at all the various impacts that we are seeing around the world. Just give me the top-down view of what it's looking like.
Frantic, I think, is the word we're all looking for, and it seems to be a cascading line of failures that we're experiencing. We have colleagues in Asia, going from Australia to the US. Here in Berlin, it seems to be down everywhere, the system. For instance, the Berlin airport, obviously not the world's biggest, but that's down. No operations there. We've just received notification from the FAA, the US regulator, that there's no more takeoffs from the likes of American Airlines, Delta, United. We're checking on Heathrow, obviously, the most important airport here in Europe. So it's very much chaotic at this point in terms of the news gathering, but also in terms of what we know and how deep this goes. To your point, this seems to go beyond the airline sector. You've spoken of the LSE, we're hearing banks. So it's really sort of the depth of the problem that we're trying to explore right now.
But just with the airlines, do we know what the issue is? I heard somebody earlier, I think it was Anna's, talking about the fact that this is cockpit related. Is it cockpit related? I heard from Cathay earlier on that maybe it was check-in related. Do we know whether this is a safety issue or just a sort of broader operational issue?
It seems to be the latter. So the cockpit, so it's not obviously something that's inside the cockpit. This is the interface between what's happening on the ground and the cockpit. And, we have had disruptions previously. What we've not seen in a very long time, if ever, is a disruption on this kind of scale. This is new. So that's what we're trying to figure out, where exactly the fault came from and how quickly it can be fixed. Some airlines have said that operations are slowly coming back, whereas others seem to be falling into this issue now. So, it's very much sort of an in and out operation at the moment. So the interface between ground control and the cockpits, and again, there's always a lot of security built into this. So whenever there is an issue, the mode of operation usually is to sort of slow things down, keep aircraft on the ground, just to keep people safe.
Yeah, and just to flag to everybody that we are now running a Top Live blog, a T Live blog, the team on the news desk, getting that up and running really quickly, and that's running across the Bloomberg terminal. So there's one place to go to get updates on what seems to be this widespread technical outage. Microsoft saying they are working on this. Benny, can I come to you about, in terms of how logistically this is managed, when you bring this many aircraft? I mean, this happened in the middle of the night, I suppose, stateside, so maybe not quite as many aircraft flying as you would expect, but when you're bringing them all to the ground, you start running out of places to put them, and give us a sense of, if Microsoft does resolve this, how quickly you can get things back to normal. This takes time to stop and then restart.
Well, that's exactly it. These things have this sort of cascading effect. You're going to have a lot of aircraft that are out of position. So this will usually take, a problem of this magnitude usually takes days to resolve in terms of getting everything back to order. Now, don't expect planes to come falling out of the sky. You know, let's not panic. But as a precaution, people will be on the ground. I've just heard from a colleague who was due to fly out of Berlin today. That's stopped, that airport operation. So you will see planes landing in places they shouldn't be landing, i.e. airports they shouldn't be landing, not in a green field, and getting that system back in. You know, it's a very finely tuned operation. That's going to take a while.
Benny, thanks very much. Benedict Camel joining us there with the latest on the aviation sector. One of the early sectors to respond to this kind of technical outage, it would seem, but it might go wider, of course. Karim Chedid joins us, head of EMEA investment strategy at BlackRock. Now, Karim, when you said yes to this interview, we didn't know we'd be talking about technology outages, and we won't pretend we know more about this than we do. This is very much a developing story. We're keeping an eye on Microsoft and what it's saying, but we do see evidence that the aviation sector is impacted, the LSE, banks over in Australia, so we'll look for the banking sector to be an area where we see impact. I suppose there's not much we can say thematically about this, other than it illustrates that when lots of businesses rely on one provider, or maybe many providers, but relying on this provider, if it has problems, that goes far and wide, and we're getting an illustration of that today.
I mean, when we look at the tech sector, for us, it's been a theme, a very important theme, obviously, with the concentration of the rally in the stock market, but also looking at some of the thematics, like you say, beyond just the big tech names. What are some of the other themes in tech that investors have been looking at? And one area is digital security, for example. You know, this idea that within tech you need more reliance on companies that provide security in the cyberspace and the tech space, but also some of the other thematics we've seen are around infrastructure-related themes, which have a relevance also to AI as we think.
And I suppose cloud and tech optionality is something that businesses are going to be thinking a lot about this morning. I'm not sure how much that plays into your wider view on tech, but cloud has come such a long way as a theme, and I wonder if this raises questions about that.
Yeah, certainly, it's a very important theme within tech that has been already a focus on a subsector level, but certainly it's the tech thematics have been an area where we've also seen a lot of interest in ETF flows.
Look, I guess we should draw parallels with the pandemic. You think about what we learned during the pandemic and supply chains. This is in some ways a supply chain. This is a part of the supply chain story. During the pandemic, we learned where shortages were, chips, etc.
With no stock. This is one that manifests itself really quickly, isn't it? This supply chain issue, it's on demand. You're relying on these cloud providers right now.
Yep, to be able to deliver. Does it imply, which a lot of companies have learned the lesson of, that you need to diversify? Does it imply that you need to have more resilience in your systems? Do you need to think about what happens when one supplier can't be there? Can another supplier be there? And that's a lesson that a lot of businesses have learned during the pandemic. And I wonder whether this is I don't know how substantial this is ultimately going to be, but maybe one of the takeaways from this is you need resilience in your systems.
On a micro basis, 100%. From an investor standpoint that isn't actually directly invested, I thought the market action this morning is fascinating, not just in terms of the individual airline stocks right now, but you're seeing this in the macro haven assets as well. A bit into the dollar, a bit into the yen, a bit into the Swiss franc, futures dropping in the States, a bit into treasuries. This is your classic risk-off bid on a macro front. And I kind of thought, given that we were talking about some of the issues around what's going on in the Swiss economy, the Japanese yen, etc., those go-to havens wouldn't be go-to havens anymore, and yet in a moment like this, they are. Walk us through that.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes the traditional risk-off playbook does play out. There is one thing that you know, when you talk about supply chains, that comes to my mind, which is around this theme that you have more sticky inflation in this system.
Yep.
Because when you have supply chain disruptions, when you have one of the mega forces that we focus on is this fragmentation theme in supply chains, which ultimately is one of the reasons why in our core macro view, to your point about taking the big picture and thinking top down rather than bottom up, although the bottom up is super important as well in times like this, the broad macro view is that inflation is here to stay, even though disinflation has been a big theme this year. And so when we tie it to things like, you know, the ECB meeting yesterday, the Fed coming up end of July, higher rates for longer is ultimately here to stay in a world where inflation is more sticky.
In theory, the cloud should be disinflationary, shouldn't it? You would have, in theory. But if you have to have multiple suppliers, maybe that doesn't turn out to be the case. Maybe if you're more cautious about putting your stuff into the cloud, that has less of an effect as well.
But isn't this the very concern we saw? You talked about the pandemic, but since then, so much investment, and we saw this show up in the likes of cybersecurity stocks, for example. There was a big push into cloud, a big push into AI, and then a big push into defense to protect against things like this. Not that I'm saying this has ulterior motives, but even cybersecurity is meant to prevent against some of these kind of software glitches. Is this something in the more longer term, I'm broadening this out, we invest in? Is simply because this week we've had a slew of geopolitical news, and time again, we haven't really worked out how the geopolitics, specifically in the States, plays into that playbook. But moments like this might.
So we just published our mid-year outlook and our investment directions piece, which really talks to some of these themes in terms of how to invest in themes in H2 against this backdrop. And we look at a few things. We split it into key trade ideas in equities, in bonds, and in portfolio diversifiers. The reason why we stripped out a whole section on portfolio diversifiers speaks to this point around what are the diversifiers in this environment. Is it the traditional safe haven in bonds, or is it looking at greater allocations to things like gold, where gold has done pretty well even in a high real rate environment, and it's only recently that we started to see a turnaround in ETF flows into gold, even though it's been doing well for quite some time, and even though the negative correlation it usually has with high read rates has broken down.
Softer this morning.
Right. That's interesting. Well, I was wondering about how this plays into the rotation theme. We talked a lot at the beginning of this week, Karim, about rotation out of tech. Not sure anybody saw this coming, but out of tech into small caps. Is that something that, if this continues, maybe just underscores that? But even without that, do you see that as a theme that continues, that broadening?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, notwithstanding the events this morning, we're all still digesting the news and what the market implications could be. But we take the view, when we look at that rotation, that it's not really backed up by fundamentals. So when you look at the fundamentals, actually what we're seeing is that earnings are still driving the tech sector quite well. Now, we are expecting breadth in earnings. So it's not rotation, it's breadth. So we're expecting breadth in earnings. When we look at 2023, the S&P 500 earnings growth was around 9%. Without Magnificent Seven, it was 0. This year, we're expecting those numbers to be much closer. We're expecting earnings to be about 13%, and without Magnificent Seven, 11%. So there's less concentration in the earnings picture, which fundamentally means that we could have less concentration in equities, more breadth in the market rally, but not rotation. So we still like the leaders as well.
In terms of what we learned this week, this has been a really weird week. We've seen a rotation out of big cap stocks into small cap stocks. That seems to have reversed a little bit. We're trying to factor in and think about how we price in the Trump trade right now. There seems to be a lot of uncertainty at the moment. In terms of kind of where we go next, what needs to be clarified for this market to regain a sense of direction? Do you think we have a sense of direction at the moment?
I mean, it's certainly a bit more choppy at the moment, but the direction of travel is still up. when you zoom out. So despite some near-term volatility, and we do expect that choppy trading to continue. So we do expect
more volatility is
yes.
something that we should expect over the coming months.
Yes, but with a higher direction. So we remain overweight equities.
Yep.
And within that equity overweight, we have conviction on the US and Japan.
Okay, so you remain overweight equities.
Mm-hmm.
If big tech continues to sell off and the market broadens, does the index go up or down?
Up. So we're overweight
sure?
equities because we think stocks can continue to deliver returns in this environment, especially as we see the rate cuts continuing.
Do I buy the index at that point, or do I have to be much more stock selective?
I think you still buy the index because we still expect the leaders in that index to go up, especially backed up by the fundamental story in earnings. Right. But there will be opportunities in the other parts. So that's why I was saying it's not a rotation, rather it's a bit more breadth.
Okay.
Karim, thank you. Karim Chedid, Head of EMEA Investment Strategy at BlackRock. Just a quick word on where we are on markets. Stock 600 down 0.5% this morning. We don't have that price for the overall index on the FTSE 100. The CAC 40 down 0.4%. So we do see some modest selling across European equity markets in response to this, and US futures certainly dipped on the back of this. And to Kriti's point, we did see some move into some of those havens this morning.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic. We're going to, of course, keep you apprised of all the developments as we monitor them from the airline space to the more macro. All that coverage and more coming up next. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
"20 minutes into the equity session this Friday morning, the story that is dominating are the outages that we are seeing around the world. The transport sector is being affected. We've seen a number of airlines this morning having to halt operations, both ground operations at the airfield, checking people in, etc. It started in Asia. We are now seeing it rippling through Europe and into the United States. It is affecting other areas of industry as well. We are monitoring what is happening with the banking sector very carefully, and also some of Europe's exchanges. Let's continue to get an update on what we know and what we don't know. Sam Unstead from our Bloomberg Markets Today blog joins us now around the table on set. Good morning. What do we know?
Well, at the moment, we're still learning. So the really, really key thing that we know, and we're now live blogging this separate from Markets Today, is Microsoft. Microsoft 365, if you go to their status page, it effectively lists almost everything as being down, or service degradation, as they call it. So that is leading into issues with IT systems all over the place. You guys have already mentioned the airports and airlines. That is probably the most visible sign of it so far. But if you... earlier this morning, as this was starting to emerge, and actually as we were sat here waiting for announcements to come through from the RNS, and they were not, we started looking around places like Down Detector and trying to get a sense of exactly how widespread this actually is. And on there are a large number of companies you just mentioned. UK banks are on there, lots of airlines in particular. That, as I say, that seems to be the main area where this is hitting. But it's also providing a little lack of visibility for trading, as you guys, again, have sort of already mentioned. A lot of online brokers are also reporting there's some issues with their services and logging in.
We have had one viewer write in, though, to say he is up and he is trading. So, well, you know, somebody's at it. But the FTSE 100 is now giving us... We are now getting our price on that. So we're down 0.6%. So it's among the worst performers in Europe, that overall index. And the banks you mentioned, Kriti, I think you were saying that the banks are underperforming there. Tell us about the link with Crowdstrike, then, because I see so we've got some Japanese reports that problems seem to arise in PCs with Crowdstrike security software installed. This is coming from our T-Live blog that you reference. And they cite representatives from Microsoft Japan and Crowdstrike Japan. So that's an area that we're now going to be looking into.
Yeah, and a couple of other areas as well, a couple of other mentions in reporting, particularly out of Australia, and some companies as well who have been tweeting of the issues that they've been having, and they've been mentioning Crowdstrike in particular. And so this morning, we're still waiting for, obviously, US pre-market to open. But on TradeGate, CrowdStrike has securities there, and when I left my desk, they were down about 6 or 7%. So they are also getting a bit of a focus. Microsoft, actually, on TradeGate as well, was starting to dip a little bit lower as this continued. And it may be, actually, as you sort of mentioned, we're starting to get some prices. It may be that this is starting to resolve itself. But certainly, CrowdStrike, Microsoft shares were a little bit weaker earlier on.
Anna was talking about the banks as well, so you mentioned it, and I should just point out that HSBC, Barclays, and the London Stock Exchange, in terms of index contribution, are some of your biggest weights on the FTSE 100. But I'm curious kind of what happens from here. Is this something that, and we've seen previous iterations of this, at least over in the States, when there have been things like outages, et cetera. What is the playbook that you've seen in terms of this play out?
Well, obviously, it depends how long it goes on for, right? I think the main area, as I say, you guys have already covered this really nicely with Benny, but the airlines is really the main sector where you're going to see a real impact, because even if this does get sorted out very quickly, it's causing huge disruption, very, very significant disruption that will filter out globally. So that's the key area. For everyone else, it really entirely depends on how quickly it gets resolved. If it gets resolved relatively fast, then ultimately it doesn't have a huge amount of impact. There may be a little bit of, Kriti actually mentioned earlier on, a little bit of a risk-off move in markets. Whether that's down to this or whether that's down to just the sort of general mood, we'll see as the day goes on. But you may see a little bit of that if this continues to go on for a long period of time. Is this a supply chain
disruption story?
Well, yeah, actually, I heard you talking about that earlier, and I think that's actually a very smart way to look at it, is that you're sort of saying, particularly during the pandemic, you had lots of companies who were reliant on, sort of, say, one major
Single
provider.
Suppliers.
Yeah. And now you're having the same sort of thing with IT. You have, within the cloud market, only a couple of really, really major, huge companies that that control the vast majority of the market. So when you have an issue like this and something goes down, and when you look, it's a relatively, what should in some respects be a relatively minor issue. It's one update from a provider to the provider, but it's having this huge impact across various parts of the market. So it raises that same question that was asked during the pandemic. Do you need to have a sort of more diversified supply chain so that when these things happen, things can step in? Yeah, that's certainly, I think, a more existential question that will come from this.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that Air France is saying this morning that flights en route are not affected by this issue, so that's perhaps useful to point out. But Guy, also, I'm looking at the T-Live blog this morning, and somebody making the aviation team making the point that outages do occur. Aviation is grounded sometimes, but often it's to do with one particular geography, and for it to happen on such a scale in what seems to be 3 different continents is extremely unusual.
Well, that's what the point was Benny was making earlier, is we've seen this, but we haven't seen this on this scale, and it speaks to the interconnectedness of the airline sector and again the reliance on key systems. That is in some ways the other story here, is that these are systems that speak to each other globally. We talk about the fact that these are affecting, that there are a few suppliers here. There are only a few suppliers globally that manage technology on this kind of a scale, and you think about the way that the AI story is developing. You almost wonder whether that gets even more concentrated. In order to be able to get scale in that business, you have to spend aggressively. And again, there are only a few companies that are capable of doing that.
All right, Sam Unstead from our Bloomberg Markets Today team, we thank you so much for sticking, of course, with the story. We've got plenty more coverage ahead. We're going to hit it from all the different angles, from the airlines to the banks to, of course, the defense story as well. We'll bring that all here, right here, live on Bloomberg Television. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
Half past the hour. Welcome back this Friday. We are monitoring an ongoing situation which is affecting businesses around the world. It appears to emanate from Microsoft, from CrowdStrike. It is affecting airlines. We've already talked about the impact there. It is impacting trading to a certain degree. It is impacting the banking sector here in Europe as well. We are seeing equity markets under a little bit of pressure this morning. We sold off into the close yesterday. We are continuing to sell off this morning, probably as a result of what we're seeing here. Airlines are being affected, but it's not just the airline sector that is under pressure this morning. We are seeing the banking sector under pressure as well, and we will watch to see how the US Open kind of We'll get pre-trade in just a moment, in around half an hour's time. So we'll see exactly what the ripple effect is going to be into the US Open a little bit later on. But certainly early indications here in Europe is that there is a market effect from what we are seeing. We understand there's a banking effect as well. Joining us now to discuss that, sitting next to me, Tom Metcalf. Tom, good morning. We've been discussing this around the table this morning. We're trying to understand the various impacts that this outage is having. Walk us through what you're seeing in your sector.
Yeah, I think widespread is the word. It's a lot of different banks we're hearing are having issues. It's not quite clear exactly what's going on. It's obviously what we're running around asking about, like how are trading floors affected. But pretty much, you know, a whole range of firms, and that does speak to the fact that it seems to be a sort of Microsoft-led issue, because that's why you're seeing all these industries impacted. So for me, it's quite extraordinary, because normally when you see these outages, it's a little bit more sort of localised onto one industry, so there might be a finance issue. But this time you're looking at airlines, airports, and then all the way through the finance system.
Is it even more difficult to get that information out of these businesses this morning, because we're not necessarily getting all the RNS releases from the LSE that we might, because I imagine there's plenty of companies that would have to report this kind of thing, or would choose to in some way.
And as it's developing, right? So no, that's the kind of responses we're getting. Is we're just trying to find out ourselves almost. And yeah, no, that's the interesting thing. I had a very quiet Friday morning because at 7 a.m. not many sort of news releases came through, and then some are coming through in dribs and drabs. But broadly speaking, that was probably the earliest sign that something was amiss in Europe.
But we already saw that there was just an immediate delay in terms of the stocks opening even as well. And I'm curious how much of that is kind of a sector story or an exchange story, specifically in terms of the pricing. How do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it'd probably be an exchange story, right? And we're seeing, you know, big delays. I think quite a few of them have now come back online, which, you know, when they were down for 20 minutes, that's pretty unusual. You know there's something major going on. So, yeah, and it's really fascinating and makes you realise just how sort of dependent, you know, every industry is on certain like key providers like a Microsoft.
This is meant to be one of the airlines as well. This is meant to be one of the most resilient sectors. Yeah, it's meant to have. It's got armies of IT people that are meant to prevent this industry being affected. I'm presuming lessons are going to be learned from this. And again, we've been discussing this around the table as well this morning. It speaks to the. This isn't a security issue, but it speaks to the potential. What a security issue, what vulnerabilities could look like, and how and the effect that they could have. Everybody's always been terrified of what could happen within the banking sector and the financial system, where you used to see significant glitches. Is this kind of what has been done over the last few years to prevent this kind of thing happening?
Yes, the idea of a single point of failure, right? Because you do not want something as widespread. So, you know, Microsoft hasn't necessarily been in the headlines or the crosshairs apart from around cloud computing. So that's what the FCA have been doing is, oh gosh, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, loads of banks are dependent on their cloud services. So that's where I've seen the most sort of regulatory action. But you know, certainly there's going to be a lot of questions, and it'll be very interesting for me the length of time this takes to resolve. You know, if we're stretches right across the day, that'll be a very painful day for a lot of people. And, you know, I think that will probably dictate how sort of extreme, I guess, the regulatory backlash
response will be. Yeah.
We're just looking for signs of where this goes next, and we are getting a sense that maybe this is coming to the media industry as well. Universal Studios out of Japan, a broadcaster here in the UK. Lots of businesses then talking about these outages and the effect that this is having on their business. So we will try and keep you informed of all of these as they come to us. And we are still running this Top Live blog. TLIV Go is the function to use on the Bloomberg terminal. To access that blog, you'll see the headlines on there telling us that banks, airports, the LSE are all reporting system outages. Microsoft earlier dealt with the Azure cloud disruption. There certainly have been links drawn in Japan between Crowdstrike and what is happening with these Microsoft products. And certainly the aviation sector is one that we're watching very closely. That seems to be where we're getting.
A global ground stop by US Airlines is a phenomenal thing. For that to happen, for the scale of that, United, Delta, American, all issuing global ground stops on all of their flights. This is the biggest aviation market in the world. To see something like that happen will have a profound effect.
Well, the last time, and I think the only roadmap, more recent roadmap, was when this happened with Southwest, and the FAA had to do it. And it took, I think, somewhere from 3 to 5 days to get everything back online and on schedule again. But even it was almost a week before it fully came back together.
We need to join a few dots this morning. We have been busy on the defence front, on the global geopolitical front. We had a NATO meeting. We've had the European gathering taking place at the birthplace of Winston Churchill just over the last 24 hours. And all of that's been focused on some fairly traditional geopolitical threats. Cybersecurity often comes to mind when we think about technical failure. We've got no evidence that that is in play here. But there are a lot of competing demands when it comes to corporates and indeed governments and the amount of money that they spend on technology. Let's talk to Fenella McGerty, Senior Fellow for Defence Economics at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Fenella, I know your area of focus is very, much around the defence sector, and that's not particularly relevant here, although we'll wait to hear whether any of those areas of the world are affected, any defence providers are affected by these issues with Microsoft. But when we were talking in the break, you were suggesting that this just reminds us of all of the competing demands there are in terms of where businesses and governments spend their money, because this does raise concern. It makes you think, at least, about spending on IT protection.
Good morning. Yeah, absolutely. I think the main issue that we're finding within defence budgets is that issue of finding the scope to increase funding for a wide range of requirements, and this just really points to the extenuating pressures that there are. Cybersecurity is obviously something that's been focused on for a long time within budgets, and funding was being increasingly focused towards it. But now we're having these wider pressures within defence and security budgets, and it's kind of muddying that water between defence and security, because once one of these attacks happens, it really starts to impact everything else, and it becomes a wider defence issue.
Right, and I'm not suggesting that this is a cyber attack. I should just make that point once again. But just to, and Microsoft saying that they're progressing with mitigation efforts for the 365 apps and services. That's a headline just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. So let's go to defence matters proper, Fenella, because that's where your area of expertise is and where we can get the most from our conversation. We have a lot of focus on defence budgets, and we have President Trump, of course, often likes to call on Europe to spend more. Former President Trump, I should say. He likes to call on Europe to spend more. Give us an update on where we've got to, on the amounts that Europe is spending on defence, and whether we're getting close to what former President Trump has been calling for.
I think NATO members have really made extensive progress over the last few years to fulfil that investment pledge that was made 10 years ago to reach that 2% of GDP by 2024. And we really saw defence spending surge in 2024 in order to sort of finally reach that mark. And a lot of countries are now achieving it. According to official NATO figures, 19 of the 32 alliance members are implementing double-digit growth to defence in real terms, which is really remarkable when you consider that inflation rates are as high as they are at the moment. So this year they're expecting 23 members to reach or exceed that 2% goal. So countries really are making that concerted effort. They are refocused on defence, and they really have to. It's not just the political pressure from the US, but it's also obviously the security and strategic drivers in Europe itself that's causing these uplifts. So Europe's taking a far more assertive role, I think, in its defence now.
But speaking in that assertive role, you said so yourself that in terms of finances, there is a lot of handcuffing here. You're seeing these big promises of getting 2%, 3%, in Poland's case, even shooting for as high as 5%. Is this what kind of time frame are we looking at to actually get there, if indeed at all?
So the other thing that's kind of coming through is a longer-term commitment to defence spending. I think an issue that we had in Europe over the last 10 years was we didn't have enough long-term planning. Companies didn't have that future forward-looking perspective in order to make investments and to continue to grow their companies. So countries are now saying there's this time frame, we're going to spend this much. Arguably, there could be greater transparency where the countries need to explain how exactly these increases are being funded, what kind of budget items are now being counted as defence, sort of in that wider definition. As I said, security, there's a bit of a muddying of the waters. So countries are now kind of including elements that may traditionally have been security spending within the defence budget to kind of prop up the figures a little bit there. So greater transparency would be great in order for countries or industry to have that more security of supply, as it were.
OK, let's talk about the security of supply. Fenella, if Europe spends more money on defence, does it spend that money in the United States, or can it spend it in Europe? Oh,
this is such a key question, because the latest industrial strategy from the EU found that far too much funding within Europe was being spent outside of European borders. So I think it's partly skewed because we do have some major programs, so F-35, for instance, which wouldn't kind of fall in every single year. It's a major program that comes in, and that will sort of bump up the US proportion of European defence spending and where it goes. But there's such a concerted effort to use European spending on European projects and to bolster domestic defence industry. But that said, I think what we're finding is that countries are actually facing a bit of pressure, certainly on the eastern flank of NATO, where we saw Poland make huge purchases from South Korea as opposed to Europe. And that was because they argued that the sort of speed, the ability, the deliveries would be far faster in order to meet very urgent operational requirements. So even though there is that effort, there's other competing priorities, not least that there are huge capability gaps in Europe that are needing to be filled, and countries will fill those as and when they can.
What's the timeline for closing those capability gaps? We're struggling to to manufacture enough ammunition, tanks. Just kind of the kinetic kit that we need to fight wars potentially is where we're really struggling at the moment. We're not even talking about some of the cyber stuff that is obviously front and centre this morning as well. Where do those gaps exist right now? I remember the head of BAE Systems saying we can double production fairly easily, but taking it beyond that is something that is really, really hard. Have we doubled production already? Are we already coming up against those limits? How quickly can we resolve it?
So countries have implemented major programs in order to bolster production. But the problem was that going into this, European defence industry was at a very lean point. It was all run on efficiency, so there was very little stockpiling. So we kind of entered this very pressured period with very little, or not enough rather, stockpiles in order to fulfil this demand. So the increasing production has been a huge focus, and we're seeing countries reorient production, make investments. Actually, now that they have that security of demand from governments that are committing to that longer term, they're able to make that investment. We're seeing more extensive partnerships. We're seeing countries make those major acquisitions, and we're actually seeing it as a result in countries' stock prices as well, companies' stock prices as well. So companies are responding. It does take a long time, and we've got these issues within Europe at the moment with supply chains, talent acquisition, and there are wider issues. And these countries are now actually competing with each other because they're all increasing spending at exactly the same time. They're all wanting the same kit, so it's actually creating more pressure as well.
You compare and contrast what happens on the defence side and the civil side. You look at Airbus struggling to ramp up its production. It's short in its supply chain. It's short of engines. It's short of the necessary technical personnel to be able to do this. This is a huge challenge. Fenella, thank you very much indeed. Fenella McGerty, Senior Fellow for Defence Economics at the IISS International Institute for Strategic Studies, on what is happening with the defence story. It connects perfectly in some ways into what we're seeing this morning. How interconnected the world is right now, where are the risks that exist. We're seeing it demonstrated quite aptly with this Microsoft outage.
And we're getting an update from Microsoft and Kriti saying that they're progressing mitigation efforts for the 365 apps and services. So that doesn't sound like resolution yet, but progressing these mitigation efforts. The issue then is affecting users of those services. Some fascinating nuggets of how far and wide the impact of this goes coming through on the T-Live blog this morning. And just to mention a couple of them that caught my eye. McDonald's in Japan. So there's another sector that we want to keep an eye on. Anything in retail. Stansted airport, you can't pay for stuff apparently. So when you're using cards, how far do the bank issues go when it comes to the retail sector? There's all kinds of fire alarms going off in the Danish capital as well, apparently, and this is causing chaos for emergency services. And, you know, a lot of these things, when you talk about, you know, the Internet of Things and increasingly attaching all of the stuff in your house to the internet, it does make you wonder, doesn't it? So, I mean, those are just a couple of the sectors that we just haven't mentioned yet that are in focus this morning.
No, it's good context, especially because when we're looking at the market pricing, at least, we're only seeing that reaction in the Haven assets on a macro standpoint, that risk sentiment turn. We're seeing it mostly in the airlines, even though the banks are taking a pretty big hit as well on a risk-off day that we started off anyway.
This is uncertainty. This is not risk. This is uncertainty. This is hard to price. We don't know what the impact is going to be yet. This is a black swan event. I think this probably ticks the boxes for a kind of black swan event. Maybe it's a grey swan event, but it certainly feels like it's at the kind of the edges of the distribution of outcomes we would normally expect. Really hard to price. Yeah, a really interesting point by one of our Asia Transport reporters saying that this incident for him, this from Danny Lee, brings to mind something that happened in 2010, where an update from the antivirus maker McAfee that pushed out, mistakenly identified a core Windows file as infected and wound up disabling customers' machines around the world. But you think about how much more connected we are now than we were in 2010, and you can see why this has a much bigger impact than that would have done. And it comes back to this whole sort of issue of single-source suppliers. Like, it's a connected ecosystem, but single-source suppliers in that space, you're relying on that particular ecosystem, a problem within it, and you get a substantial problem around the world. I'm hoping that all the golfers are in the country. Well, I'm hoping that the golf continues up at Royal Troon. I'm sure it will. It's difficult enough up there already. We've got a live contest that is taking place next week. We're going to talk to Ian Poulter. Ian Poulter's going to be joining us. James Dunkley is also going to be joining us, his team principal. We'll discuss the golf story next. I wonder if there's an IT element to that. They've all got big sponsorship written across their shirts. We'll find out next. This is Bloomberg. So some would argue, and this is a slight change of direction from what we've been talking about throughout most of the morning, but bear with me, that golf's not in a particularly happy place right now. And I'm not talking about how Troon is playing, because you've seen the coverage yesterday. It looks like a fairly tough place to be right now. I'm talking maybe about the differences in how golf sees its future. We've got the traditional PGA Tour, of which obviously the Open is part of that tour, and you've got the LIV tournament, the upstart, you could argue, this Saudi-backed tournament, which has caused so much consternation over the last couple of years. You've got the Open taking place this weekend. It started yesterday. It's going to rain again this morning. Next week, you've got the JCB LIV tournament, which is taking place here in the UK. Let's talk more about this and talk about these kind of different styles of golf that now exist and kind of where we ultimately see this story going. I'm joined now, which I'm really excited about, by Ian Poulter, the co-captain of Team Majestics and the team principal of that team, James Dunkley. Fellas, thanks very much indeed for joining us. I want to talk about what is happening up in Troon. I want to talk about the golf in just a moment. James, first of all, I think a lot of people are going to be wondering this morning, is everybody here? Is the team here? Can you make sure everybody gets here? A lot of airlines have been grounding flights this morning, and I'm slightly concerned the team won't be all assembled by the time we get to next week. Are they all here? Can you confirm that for me?
3 of 4 are in the country, or in Britain, certainly.
Excellent.
2 of our players, Henrik and Sam, are up playing the Open at Troon, so enjoying the challenge up there. Ian is in his back garden near Woburn Golf Club, his home golf club, and I think Lee Westwood is currently in France on holiday. So we're either here, or I think we'll be able to get here by some mode of transport before next week.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to watching it with a great deal of enthusiasm. Ian, let's talk a little bit about where we are with this golf story. We've got the PGA, we've got LIV. There has been consternation and conflict, you can argue, between these two tours. And as golf fans, we're all hoping that at some point soon we're going to see some degree of resolution. When does that happen?
I don't have the magic date of exactly when that's going to happen. You know, since June 6th last year, obviously, the two entities trying to bring golf back together in some way, shape or form. I think we're all kind of eagerly awaiting more news from the powers that be within the PGA Tour and obviously with inside Live Golf of how it's going to blend itself together, what that potentially could look like. But first and foremost, it's good news. I think there is progress that's continuing to happen. But I think, you know, when you look at Live Golf, when you look at where and what we have done from a global perspective, 14 events is doable to blend into the season, not conflict as much with the PGA Tour. I think there's opportunity. So hopefully for the fans, there is some form of collaboration where we can all coexist. And you know, from an investment perspective, that's a different question altogether.
James, Ian talks about the fact that we can blend this together. Just compare and contrast the experience as a golf fan that I get from these two competing tours. I spent yesterday afternoon watching what was happening up in Scotland, the traditional format, but you guys have obviously got the JCB coming up next week. As a fan, can you compare and contrast the different experiences that we're getting? Because these two side-by-sides obviously kind of operate as a great example of the kind of different experiences that I'm potentially going to be getting.
Yeah, I think we've been clear from the beginning with this that these two products are very different. Majors are, you know, the pinnacle of golf, 4 rounds of tournament golf, completely individual, a very intense atmosphere. Live, it's still intense. The competition is huge. The fields are really strong. But I think why we were excited about getting involved in Live was that it is a more accessible, more relaxed environment from a tournament perspective. So what we see is much more families coming together to enjoy tournaments, you know, music playing in the background. So if you're bringing your children along, you don't have to be worried about them stepping or coughing at the wrong moment when someone's hitting a shot. So it's just a more welcoming, more accessible environment. And the average age of the people that are attending tournaments is about 25 years younger than what we see on some other tours, which I think is really important for the future of the game, to make it a more accessible, welcoming environment for people that are not just huge golf fans and have been so for a long time, but are new to the game and trying to be exposed to it in a different way.
Ian, I guess one area that you could argue there is overlap between these two formats is with the Ryder Cup. It's a team sport and it works really well and everybody gets really excited about it. I have to ask, Ian, I've been waiting. I think you've probably been waiting. Is Ian Poulter going to be a future captain of a Ryder Cup team? When does that happen? And do you think this issue between Liv and the PGA is going to get in any way in front of that?
Look, one day I would love to, you know, be captain of Ryder Cup Europe. I think, you know, what I've done and played, the amount of Ryder Cups I've played in the last 25 years, I think, you know, it would be amazing for me to do that. Currently, I'm not a member on the DP World Tour, so that would restrict me from doing so right now. There are fines which currently I'm not prepared to pay. So providing there is a level of coming together, then that would help. So, you know, hopefully...
Fantastic. Ian, James, I've got to leave it there. Thank you very much.